Hey there, guys. So I want to thank you, as always, for taking the time to check out today's live stream, where we'll be talking about a topic that I've not discussed as much when it comes to fitness and preparing for your workouts. What we're going to be going over today is primarily on warming up right to prep for heavy lifts. So this stream is going to go over primarily, of course, the warm up portion of an exercise routine. And I've touched a little bit about warm ups in the past in live streams. But what I want to do in this one is to dive a little bit deeper into the subject and the topic and really expand upon why warm ups really matter. Of course, not only for the aspect of lifting heavy weights, but also for various other reasons. So that's what I want to go over with you guys today. So excuse me, as always, I do want to mention my website, bponlinefitness.com, and you can check out a ton of information as it relates to online coaching, as well as a free fitness blog that I upload to every single week. I do have an email newsletter I send out every week when you sign up to the email list, as well as information on online coaching. But I'm sure you guys already know that because I do say that every week. But I do want to continue to plug that in for those who have not watched before. So let's go ahead and get started with this topic today on warming up. So, in this particular topic, like I mentioned, we're going to really dive a little bit deeper, not only into the aspect of warm ups for particularly we're talking about lifting heavy, but in other aspects. So, while warming up is a non negotiable, the science of warming up, dynamic versus static stretching, the three-phase warm up blueprint, mobility drills that unlock better squats, deadlifts, and presses, and how long should you warm up, quality versus quantity. So, this is all that we're going to be going over today. So, the first point, of course, is why warming up is a non-negotiable. So there's various reasons why. The first thing, of course, is that it prepares the body for performance. It activates muscles and increases their core temperature and improves overall joint mobility to move more efficiently. When you get your body prepared for lifts, it makes it way easier to get through your workout routine and prepare yourself for those coming exercises. It also helps reduce the risk of injury. So, a warm muscle is protected muscle. There's less strain on the tendons and the ligaments and joints under heavy load. So, once that muscle is warmed up, you're actually helping to reduce that risk of injury and really preparing those joints for that exercise. It can also help to boost strength and power output. So, properly activated muscles and a primed nervous system mean better reps and heavier lifts. So, naturally, when your muscles are warmed up enough, that's going to help with being more efficient in how you lift weights and as you're lifting heavier weights and progressing in your routine. It also improves mind muscle connection. This is something that I've discussed before as well. Warming up helps to dial in focus. It refines form and creates intent behind every rep. So, like I've mentioned before, when we're talking about warm ups are there to target those specific muscles that you're going to be engaging in for that specific day. So, if we're targeting the back and biceps for a specific day, we're going to be warming up those specific muscles. So, once you're getting started and you're doing that warm up and you're targeting those individual muscles, you are thinking with intention on engaging those muscles more. So it's going to naturally help and to convert into your overall routine. Another point here is that it builds long-term training and longevity. Athletes who prioritize warm-ups stay consistent, pain-free, and progress longer. So warm-ups are a great addition, and it's very essential to have them in any exercise routine. So the science of warming up. So as mentioned, there's different aspects on why warming up makes your workouts more beneficial. But there's a lot of things behind the scenes that happen when you prepare those muscles. So, of course, with a warm up, you're going to increase muscle temperature. So, as mentioned, this also helps with better performance in your routine. Warmer muscles contract more forcefully and relax faster. So for every 1 degree Celsius increase in muscle temperature, your power output improves. So the warmer those muscles are, the better you're going to be able to perform through that specific rep in your workout. It's also increasing and improving blood flow and oxygen delivery to the muscles. Gradual warm-ups dilate blood vessels, sending more oxygen and nutrients to working muscles. So this preps your body for the demands of resistance or endurance training. Nervous system activation. This is another point to keep in mind. There is an engagement of the motor units in the muscle and enhances that mind-muscle connection as we mentioned. It speeds up reaction time, coordination, and control of explosive. Again, keep in mind that explosive is, really rapid, quick paced movements and reps or compound lifts. Again, keep in mind, I know I've discussed a little bit about compound lifts in the past, but for you who are not aware, compound lifts are basically workouts that are engaging multiple muscles all at once. So there's basically two different styles of, weightlifting based exercises when we're talking about this particular point. Compound exercises are, for example, an exercise like a squat. With a squat, you're not only engaging your quads, you're also engaging your glutes, your hamstrings, and all of those muscles all together. You're not just isolating one particular area. Even though we're engaging the lower body, we're still working multiple muscle groups at once. And that's why that's a compound exercise. An isolation exercise is an exercise that focuses on isolating, of course, that particular muscle. That's going to be a bicep curl, tricep extension. Anything like that is going to be categorized under an isolation based exercise. So just keep that in mind that with that nervous system activation, you're more intentional on your movements. Again, that mind muscle connection is visualizing engaging that muscle. Like with a chest press, when we're engaging our pecs, our chest. And like with a bicep curl, we're focusing on that peak contraction, engaging that bicep. That's what the mind muscle connection is. So keep that in mind as well. So dynamic versus static stretching. This is a point that I've went over a few times in the past. I believe I went over it in a live stream before. And basically with dynamic versus static stretching, again, I do I have this slide messed up. I apologize, but I will explain what dynamic stretching and static stretching is. So when we're talking about dynamic stretching is basically movement that is done where you're basically doing a stretch, but you're using movement with it. So, for example, you would have a stretch like, say, like a hip flexor stretch. So, when you're doing a hip flexor stretch, it's almost mimicking the same exercise or the same movement as a lunge. But in a dynamic hip flexor stretch, basically what you're doing is you are, of course, kind of moving forward in a lunge when you're doing a dynamic stretch. Whereas if you're doing a static stretch, you're going to be focusing on just holding that particular, movement for roughly 30 seconds. Another, another example that you could keep in mind, like for example, if we're focusing on, let's say, stretching our lats or, engaging the back, when we're doing that type of stretch, we're going to be using a little bit more movement. We're going to be, really engaging that lat muscle. We're going to be stretching that muscle with movement. Whereas again, with the static stretch, you're going to be holding that specific movement in the same way, but you're not going to be moving you're not going to be doing any kind of, movement with that, if that makes sense. Um, that's basically what the difference is between the dynamic and static stretching. Just think of it in terms of when you're doing something like like when you're thinking of a lunge, you're focusing on, that lunge movement. But then with static, you are actually holding that lunge movement rather than kind of moving into a lunge. So I hope that makes sense there. And the real big reason with the difference between dynamic and static stretching is basically with your dynamic stretches, those are more in tune with a warm up. You're going to want to do more dynamic movements when you're doing a warm up because that's preparing you for that exercise. A lot of warm up based movements are going to focus on, of course, you're not going to be using any weights. You're primarily going to be using body weight based, movements, body weight squats, things like that. That's going to be sort of what you're going to focus on for a warm up. Whereas with a cool down, you're primarily going to focus on static stretching because those muscles really get, tightened after an exercise. It helps to really, extend and stretch those muscles to really prepare for the recovery process post workout. So that's sort of the difference there when we're talking about dynamic versus static stretching. And I apologize about the slide there. I hope that what I explained was understandable, but that's basically what it is that your static sort of stretches are holding the position, your dynamic stretches are doing more of a movement. So just think of it in that terms. So the three-phase warm-up blueprint. So the purpose in a warm-up. So what I'm going to sort of go over is sort of the different, reasoning for doing this sort of three-phase warm-up blueprint. So when should you use this? So this is primarily used, of course, before a workout. Any kind of warm-up is always done before a workout. So the purpose in a warm-up is to activate muscles, improving movement and readiness. This is not ideal before intense activity, so keep that in mind. So again, use this before a workout, after workouts, or during a cool down. It's also important the effect on performance. This is going to boost your coordination and also range of motion. And at the same time, this may reduce strength and explosive output if done before lifting. It's also best used for prepping the body for movement and load. And it also enhances flexibility and calming the central nervous system at the same time. Like we mentioned about the mind muscle connection and the nervous system being engaged, that's where that comes into play. So just keep that in mind as well. So, mobility drills for improving exercises. So, with mobility drills, the way that I can really define this is more in line of a circuit training routine or somewhat in the way when we would talk about a HIIT training routine. So, why mobility matters? This matters because it enhances joint range of motion. So you're improving movement quality and exercise form. It also reduces the risk of injury during strength training and at the same time prepares the body for explosive or loaded movements. So the top mobility drills by body region. So for the hips, this is known as the world's greatest stretch. And what this does is primarily opens the hip flexors and hamstrings. Like I mentioned before with the hip flexors, when we're talking about static and dynamic stretching, that is, of course, engaging the muscles of the lower body. The 90-90 hip rotation improves internal and external rotation. So rotational based movement patterns are going to be improved when you incorporate those movements, especially with the hips. Shoulders and thoracic spine. So wall slides help to promote scapular mobility. Think of scapular mobility, of course, as your shoulders, your shoulder blades. Thread the needle increases thoracic spine rotation. Again, you're helping with rotational movement in your spine. And that's what that means when you're performing that mobility exercise enough, you're going to get that benefit from it. With the ankles, you have a kneeling ankle dorsiflexion. This boosts squat depth and control. Dorsiflexion is basically a top of flexion, and that's what that means when we're talking about that. It's not as complicated as it looks. There's different ways, and I can't really show particular here, but there's a specific type of movement where you have a dorsiflexion being done, and that is opposite of, another type of flexion. But again, I don't want to go too deep into this particular point, but basically understand that with this type of flexion in the kneeling ankle dorsiflexion, you're boosting squat depth and control. The toe elevated calf stretch, as it's explained here, is basically that you're having your toes elevated to perform the calf stretch. This of course improves foot and ankle function. So when you're incorporating these mobility drills into your overall exercise routine, you're going to get these benefits as long as you continue to sort of add these sort of mobility drills into your overall routine. So, how long should you warm up? So, with the warm ups, they kind of depend again based on what you're doing in your overall routine. It's going to be all dependent on what type of exercise you're going to be engaging in for that particular day. So, the recommended warm up duration for a general guideline is roughly 10 to 15 minutes before most workouts. So, for example, to give you a deeper detail, light cardio and stretching based exercise, with a warm up in that type of exercise and movement, you're going to be focusing on 5 to 10 minutes for your warm up. If you're focusing on strength training, again, think of, weightlifting, anything like that, we're going to be focusing on 10 to 15 minutes of a warm up phase before your exercise. With heavy lifting, this is squats, deadlifts, anything that's going to be higher intensity when we're talking about weightlifting, that's going to be roughly 15 to 20 minutes for your warm up. When we're talking about hit and explosive training, because these movements are pretty rapid and our body needs, enough time to sort of prepare for that movement, we're going to be doing that a little bit more than 15 minutes. So that's the general guideline here, or the general, sort of blueprint when we're looking at which, the amount of warm up time we should do before we get started with our exercise. Alrighty, guys. So that's all I have for you today. Again, I hope that you found this helpful and valuable. I apologize for the issue with that slide. Again, sometimes I do get in a rush and, I have a lot of things that I juggle, and so that happens. But usually I'm able to explain it even when I don't have it on screen, as I wanted it. But I hope that you understood what I was saying there. Again, if you have questions, feel free to reach out. I enjoy talking about each of these topics. I think it's very important, especially with the warm up. A lot of people do neglect this side of exercise. They don't really think of it as being significant, but it can play a lot of benefits in a routine and also, again, with preventing injury. So think about these different points, as you're getting into your exercise and you're, incorporating that warm up phase in your routine. If you don't do a warm up phase, think about incorporating that in your routine. It does help in a lot of ways. Um, Maybe in the future I'll talk about cooldowns and some of their benefits and why cooldowns do matter a lot, in the same vein as warm ups. Their benefits are slightly different when we're talking about a cool down because it's more the recovery aspect rather than, of course, preparing for exercise. So that's sort of the difference there. But likely in a future stream, I'll talk about why cooldowns matter. But with all that being said, guys, if you're interested in learning more about online coaching, You can visit my website, bponlinefitness.com. I do have my email here on screen if you want to contact me as well. Again, guys, I do have another live stream next Wednesday at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time, where I'll be talking more about the topic of basically that topic is kind of went blank there. But for that topic, I was trying to think what, because I do so many topics and then I can't think of what it was that I was going to discuss. But I do have one coming up next Wednesday at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. So definitely check that out. I'll have that event posted before the end of the week so that you can see what I'm going to be discussing that particular day. Um, but that'll be there for you to check out. Again, guys, I do have a video that I'm working on where I'm going to be discussing the topic of basically talking about sleep and recovery. That's something that I'm going to be uploading pretty soon to my YouTube channel. That's again, these videos are a little bit separate from my live streams, and sort of different from my short form videos that I post. But with this is going to expand upon, the recovery side of things and sleep. So that'll be uploaded pretty soon. I'm in the sort of finishing stages of editing that video. So that'll be uploaded pretty soon for you guys. And I really appreciate your time and taking the time to really check these streams out. Again, I hope that you find this helpful and valuable. I will go ahead and mention what I am discussing next week. What I'm going to be discussing next week is on supersets and drop sets. So that'll be my topic next week, for you guys to be aware of. Again, I'll have that event posted. Thank you guys once again for taking the time to check this live stream out. And if you have any questions, let me know. But I will see you guys in the next one. So I hope you have a great day.